Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink, it is time for some PathOfExile discussion. With it only being 6 days until patch 3.20 and the Sanctum expansion comes out, I thought I would put together a little bit of a list of some of the builds that I think are worth your while considering here. None of these are going to be full guides, these will be core interactions that builds are based around, and there's plenty of other information about any of them if you want to delve deeply. This is just a quick overview of a whole lot of different options. Firstly, I want to discuss 319 builds you don't want to play, and essentially the list here is Lightning Strike. Lightning Strike is getting Starforged. Lightning Strike is going from a build that was very, very dominant for a very long time to one that I don't think will be played except for the memes. That's my general expectation here. If you really like Lightning Strike's playstyle, then you should consider trying Frostblades and see how you find that. Frostblades does have some weaknesses that Lightning Strike didn't have though in its earlier incarnations, and that is that Frostblades is not very good when it comes to killing bosses. Lightning Conduit's been nerfed pretty hard between 319 and 320, but I don't think that this is a gutting that kills the skill. This is a skill that's going from extraordinary damage to solid damage. I think it's still very much playable. Spectral Helix is also being nerfed, and it should remain serviceable. This one's probably going from extraordinary damage to ordinary damage. If you genuinely like the playstyle of Spectral Helix, I think you can still play this skill. Now, there's a lot of discussion around Bane's changes. I think that Bane's changes overall represent a slight buff when it comes to killing bosses and a modest nerf when it comes to killing everything else. Bane will still be fine, and I think it's 100% fine to play this skill. It's just not on the list of things I'm going to go through here because there's a limit to how much you can fit into one video. But if you like Bane and you want to play it, then there is an outstanding guide made by Sanctum that I highly recommend checking out. It's got a whole lot of information for early, medium, late league progression, and is just the authority on Bane. So now we're going to get into the skills that I can recommend, and we're going to start with Seismic Trap Poison. So everyone underestimated this in 319 because between 318 and 319, Seismic Trap was nerfed. It was triple nerfed, and the triple nerf was actually not enough to kill the skill. But early on in 319, everyone thought it was dead. Then it got tested by a few players, and they realized, hey, this is still better than Explosive Trap, which is the next best trap skill. And as a result, it's still incredibly good. This build can be played Glass Cannon or Tanky, both are viable. You pretty much always play it as a Saboteur. You clear using Exsanguinate linked to traps, which can be done in Deerstalker boots early in the league, Shaper Gloves later in the league, lots of options there. This skill is also getting buffed by a bug fix. This means that against bosses it will perform better in 320 than it did in 319. And in 319 it was a build that could be taken from league start to killing all of the Uber bosses quicker than pretty much any other skill. Early game, there's some major upgrades you can chase: Cold Iron Point and a helmet with increased duration of ailments you inflict while focused. Late game, you have the incredible chest piece, the Covenant, to chase, and also Forbidden Jewels. There's lots of good options here. You can go for Polymath, you can go for Noxious Strikes, but there's also other options as well. You can even take a 5th node within the Saboteur Ascendancy. The resource I would recommend if you want to learn more about this build is Jung Rowan, the streamer. Here's someone who plays this skill at a very high level and has played it a lot of times. This is an S tier skill for boss killing. A for heist, B for mapping. The reason that it's better in heist is that heist is more predictable as to where the most dangerous monsters are going to be. They're usually going to be behind a door. And as a result, when you get to a door and once your rogue is sort of 75% done with the animation, you can throw down all of your seismic traps and you can have an absolute slaughterfest at that door. Whereas if you're mapping, you might find that you get a rare monster that's particularly tanky that you weren't expecting. And once more, Saboteur is the best ascendancy to play on this build. Ignite Wave of Conviction Elementalist is the next thing I want to recommend. I played this in Mayhem. It's squishy at low budget, but it has phenomenal clear. I do not recommend this if you're playing in hardcore, but it is a very solid thing in softcore. Even if you die occasionally, you'll be killing monsters so fast that you won't really mind. Now you can use Vaal Flameblast in Vaal Caress to get burst damage on bosses. This is not the only thing you can do for burst damage on bosses, but it's one of the best strategies. Now, one of the key things that makes this build better than it used to be is that Beric's Respite was made something like 15 or 20 times more common in patch 3.19. So in 3.18 and earlier, Beric's Respite was tier 1 rarity. This is several times rarer than Chevron's Wrappings. It appears that 3.19 brought it to being tier 3 rarity, which is several times more common than Chevron's Wrappings. It's still not a common item, but it's certainly something that is not staggeringly rare like it used to be. If you're playing in Trade League, you can pick it up easily. If you're playing in solo self-found, you will get it within 100 atoll maps. Now this skill is A+ tier for clear, B+ tier for heist, and B tier for bossing. Bossing, its weakness is that it just doesn't have the same degree of burst damage as some of the better builds, which means that you need to dodge a lot of the boss's skills for longer. Heist, its weakness is that it's a little bit squishy. It's great at clearing stuff, but it doesn't have the resilience of some of the builds that are better in Heist. Now, this can be pushed to S tier clear with investment in Chaos Explosions, and the best way to get that is through Profane Bloom, Forbidden Flesh, and Forbidden Flame Jewels. They are not cheap. Your key upgrades, Beric's Respite, Forbidden Jewels, +2 Amulet, and there is a guide for this that was put out by Rutu, which later transitions into Vortex Ignite. You can stay Wave of Conviction Ignite if you want, or you can transition into Vortex Ignite. I'll leave that decision up to you, but Rutu covers both in his guide. Next, we're going to look at an experimental build. Everything that I've tagged as experimental is something that's a little bit risky, and that I'm not going to say unconditionally, I know this to be a great build. It's just something that seems like it has some potential. So the Champion Ascendancy is really good at scaling base player defenses, that is armor and evasion. And these strengths play really well for up close and personal playstyles, which Blade Flurry and the brand new Vaal Blade Flurry definitely require. Grace, Determination, Defiance Banner make Perseverance into a better item offensively, and the Vaal version of Blade Flurry inflicts blind on enemies around you, which then makes evasion better. That's what it seems to do anyway from the video that GGG put out. I don't think that their teaser video would cover something like an alternate quality that was required to inflict blind. It does look like it does just inflict blind on everything near you while you're channeling it. Now, this is not a safe choice. Blade Flurry's mapping has historically been bad, the skill is a boss specialist skill, and Vaal Blade Flurry does not look to change this. I expect this to be A+ or S tier for bossing, C tier for mapping, and B tier for Heist. The reason for calling it B tier in Heist is that it doesn't have amazing clear. It'll be super tanky as a champion, and as a result, you can probably endure a lot of hits, but you might risk getting overwhelmed in some situations. It may actually be that I'm wrong and that it is actually A tier or A+ tier or even S tier in Heist. That's something we'll need to test out. Another experimental build here, this is a Vaal Molten Strike Champion. Champion is really good for some funny reason, and we're going to see this as a recurrent theme throughout this video. Molten Strike has been almost but not quite good enough for a long time. It was playable in 3.19, just wasn't particularly good. But the Vaal version addresses a major weakness with the skill, and that is map clear. So this can also be played as a Poison Assassin, which is a completely different build, but mostly people have been playing Molten Strike as a champion using the unique Claw, Hand of Wisdom in action. Now, it's hard to tier this because it's so untested and we don't know all the mechanics of Vaal Molten Strike as yet. I'm going to predict that this will be about a B tier for mapping, maybe B-, but it should shine on bosses and Heist. We just need to see it in action to be sure. Another experimental option is Vaal Smite. Again, I'm going to recommend the champion here. I want this video to suggest diverse ascendancies, but the champion is too good, and as a result, every time I'm thinking, oh, do I want to suggest a chieftain for something? I'm like, no, I'm just going to suggest the champion instead because it's better. Everything said about Molten Strike applies here. The skill has the same strengths and same weaknesses as Molten Strike, and the Vaal version addresses them completely. This is definitely champion only though, because Inspirational, one of the champion's best ascendancy nodes, boosts the aura damage from Smite. I am predicting this will be A tier for bossing, maybe even better, A tier for Heist at least, and B tier for mapping. I do think there's a lot of potential to cause some really spectacular looking explosions when you open a door in a Heist and drop Vaal Smite immediately and potentially delete the entire screen. I think that'll be a lot of fun. One thing I do want to say about Vaal Smite is that you are going to want to upgrade to a 2120 version of Vaal Smite as soon as is practical. These are not going to be cheap, as the way that they're created is through the use of the Lapidary Lens, which is in the Incursion Temple. It seems like you need to use 8 Incursion Temples on average in order to get yourself a 2120 Vaal Smite, as well as 8 2020 Smite Gems. Not even sure that those are the right numbers, but it's something in that sort of ballpark. So that's going to be a fairly substantial investment, and unlike a lot of other skills, this is actually a big jump over a Vaal 2020 gem or a non-Vaal 2120 Smite, because there's extra functionality that you get, but also Smite's aura will get better. The skill will be a lot better once you do this. So that's a big investment, but it is something that will pay off. Next, I want to recommend Trickster Cold Damage Over Time. Now, there's a lot of ascendancies that you can play the Cold Damage Over Time archetype on. It's my personal opinion that Trickster is now the best of them, but there is definitely no consensus on this across the PathOfExile community. Trickster's strength is its life recovery on trash and its tankiness. Trickster has so many things going for it that just keep it alive, and as a result, I think it's a fantastic choice. But you can play this as an Occultist, you can play it as an Elementalist, and potentially even you can go more hipster and play it as something else. Shack Central has an excellent beginner guide to the Occultist version of this build. one of the best beginner guides around, and it can be modified to make it a Trickster reasonably easily. I'm expecting that this will be A+ or S tier for Heist, A tier for mapping, and maybe A- tier for bossing. It's not S tier for bossing because the damage is just not all that high, which means that you're going to need to endure boss attacks for longer. You're going to need to keep playing around them for longer. But Heist in particular, this looks really, really impressive on. The Trickster's defenses line up pretty well against Heist content, and additionally, you've got a movement speed / action speed increase in one step ahead, and you've got Polymath to recover life all the time. You're going to be recovering life, mana, and energy shield every time you kill something, and you'll be killing a lot of stuff in Heist because it's some of the most dense content in the game. That's why I think that it's going to be particularly good there, but it does have a lot of potential in the rest of the game as well. Okay, now we got something that's risky and experimental that's being theory crafted on the PathOfExile builds subreddit. There is nothing complete or ready to recommend as yet here, but there seems to be a lot of potential for an Occultist that uses traps to inflict Hexblast and that scales damage through poison. This is something that's a work in progress, and there's a couple of key mechanics that need to be tested before I can genuinely recommend this, but the numbers so far look promising. This is something that's on my radar maybe as a second build for the league, but it is something that is definitely worth taking seriously. And then finally, we've got one of the safest and surest choices, one of the very best builds of 3.19, and it is still just as good in 320, and that is the humble Righteous Fire Inquisitor. So it is losing a small amount of regeneration, but it is still going to be extraordinarily good regeneration-wise. It's been a top-tier build for a long time, extremely good life recovery, even with the Consecrated Ground nerfs that are coming to Pious Path in 3.20, and the Maven boots push this build clear from solid up to spectacular. This build uses Fire Trap to boost single target damage, as Fire Trap's non-ignite damage over time scales with pretty much all the same stats as Righteous Fire does, so everything you do to scale up your Righteous Fire damage will make Fire Trap better, and that will help you take down bosses that are tankier. It's my opinion that this is an S tier skill for Heist, and A tier for maps and bosses. Bosses, it's a little bit lower in DPS, but it has such amazing life recovery that you can afford to make a fair few mistakes as long as they're not against one-shot skills. So as long as you're not trying to face tank something like an Uber Shaper Slam, you can definitely take a few hits here and there and then quickly recover that life and energy shield you've lost. You'll have both a big buffer of life and energy shield and also rapid recovery of that, which is a really, really strong situation to be in. For Heist, you've got a combination of the ability to project damage without taking actions and to propagate kills around corners and also to endure big hits. This is definitely an S tier build for Heist for all those reasons. And for general purpose mapping, this is a really strong build as well. All in all, Righteous Fire Inquisitor is probably one of the very safest builds you can start, and is something that will definitely perform well in 3.20. And I'll just mention during editing that there is an outstanding video guide to this by content creator Pox, P-O-H-X, which is very much worth your while having a look at if you're intending to play this build. We'll have to find out exactly how good it is in the Sanctum content, and that's going to be hard to predict. We'll have to work that out over the first week of the league. That's all I got on this. May your Vaal Orbs have interesting results.